Hi Year 12, this is Miss Paps working her way through Hamlet. We're up to Act 2. So Act 1 ended with Hamlet finally meeting his father's ghost and swearing revenge in his name. So Act 2, Scene 1, we start in Polonius's house. Don't forget, in this storyline, the last time that we've really seen these characters, we had Laertes going off to university and his father Polonius giving him a lot of advice about how to behave. And we also had Ophelia being told by her father to stop seeing Hamlet. So Polonius and his servant Reynaldo come in, and Polonius is sending Reynaldo after Laertes with some money and some more instructions for Laertes. So Polonius is just telling Reynaldo exactly what to do. So he says to Reynaldo, make inquire of his behaviour, so find out what Laertes is up to before you actually visit him. And then he carries on giving him advice, and he says, find out what Laertes is up to by asking around. Pretend that you're a distant friend rather than his family servant so that people are more open with you. He says to Reynaldo, talk about Laertes as though he's a wild party boy, but don't ruin his reputation. And Reynaldo says, yes, okay, I'll say that he gambles. And Lord Polonius adds to that and says, yes, you can say that he drinks, that he fights, that he swears, that he flirts. You can say these things. And Reynaldo says, oh, that's a bit far. That might dishonour him. And Lord Polonius says, no, just make it sound like he's enjoying his freedom, not that he's weak or corrupt or a loser or anything. And Reynaldo says, why? Why should I do this? And Polonius says, well, here's my drift, here's my idea, and I believe it is a fetch of wit. It's a good idea, it's a smart idea. You laying these slight sullies on my son, as it were, a thing a little soiled in the working. So if you sort of say that Laertes is a little bit of a playboy, your party in converse, him you would sound, having ever seen in the predominate crimes the youth you breathe of guilty. So if the person that you're speaking to has ever seen Laertes, gambling or drinking or swearing or flirting, then they'll laugh and make a joke out of it, and by agreeing with you, that tells you what he's been up to. Whereas if you just went up to them and said, hey, Laertes, is he a good guy? They might sort of be on their guard and not be honest about how Laertes is really behaving, because they'll know that you're checking up on him. And so we just get a bit of characterisation through this scene, because Polonius is very pompous and he is a bit of a windbag. He kind of just keeps going on long after the point is made. And Reynaldo kind of just listens fairly politely. So here, Lord Polonius is just saying again, the person that you're speaking to will be tricked into confirming that Laertes is up to no good by saying that they saw him gambling or anything. But he does say, your bait of falsehood takes this carp of truth, and thus do we of wisdom and of reach, with windlasses and with assays of bias, by indirections find directions out. So this is being said specifically about Laertes in this case, but it's a statement that we can apply to Hamlet as well. So the fishing metaphor there, your bait of falsehood takes the carp of truth, shows that Polonius actually values deceit, which is quite ironic considering his advice to Laertes earlier in Act 1. It shows that he doesn't actually practice what he preaches and that he thinks deceit is an acceptable approach. So if you're looking for a character flaw in Polonius, that's a fairly glaring one. However, it is also what Hamlet is doing by pretending to be mad. He's using a bait of falsehood in order to try and find the carp of truth. And by indirections, or by lying, find directions or the truth out. You can see that Polonius is a character that we are not supposed to take seriously or admire. We're supposed to see him as a bit of an idiot. And so his advice is probably something that we should be considering, that Shakespeare might not have wanted us to see that advice as good advice. So then this bit here, Reynaldo just keeps trying to leave, and Polonius is hesitant to let him because he just keeps giving more and more advice. So Reynaldo finally gets out, and then Ophelia comes. And Ophelia is upset. And so Polonius asks her what's wrong. And she says, I've been so affrighted. I'm frightened. And Polonius says, what? And Ophelia gives us this description. My lord, as I was sewing in my closet, her closet is like the room next to her bedroom, so it's quite a private chamber that you wouldn't normally have a gentleman in. Lord Hamlet, with his doublet all unbraced, no hat upon his head, his stockings fouled, ungartered and down-gyved to his ankle, pale as his shirt, his knees knocking each other, and with a look so piteous in purport as if he had been loosed out of hell, to speak of horrors, he comes before me. So she's just saying she was sewing in a place where only her servant women should have been sort of coming to see her, and Hamlet has come in. He's dishevelled, he's partially undressed, he looks crazy, and he just comes into her. So you'll notice that here this is a report of Hamlet's madness. It's not seen. It would have been really easy for Shakespeare to have made this scene between Ophelia and Hamlet and to have Hamlet actually coming in and doing this. So it's interesting that he's chosen instead to have Ophelia report it. It comes back to that theme of appearances versus reality and deceit, and that idea of gossip and slander and hearsay, that idea of not knowing what to trust. But I do want you to keep thinking about why Shakespeare has chosen to report things instead of actually showing them, because the answer that you come up to that question will really help inform your understanding of the play. So think about it, because different critics have different interpretations, and you're welcome to have your own interpretation as well. So then Polonius, after hearing this description of Hamlet coming in, says, is he mad for your love? And Ophelia says, look, I'm not sure, but he could be. I fear it, I think so. And Polonius says, well, what did he say? And Ophelia continues describing what was going on. She says, he took me by the wrist and held me hard. Then goes he to the length of all his arm, and with his other hand thus over his brow, he falls to such perusal of my face as he would draw it. So he's walked in, he's grabbed Ophelia by the arm and kind of pulled her close, and then pushed her so that he's still holding on to her wrist, but she's an arm's length away from him so that he can see her sort of more from a distance, and then holding her like that with one hand and putting the other hand over his face. He's just stayed there for ages, staring at her. Long stayed he so. At last, a little shaking of mine arm, and thrice his head thus waving up and down, he raised a sigh so piteous and profound, as it did seem to shatter all his bulk and end his being. That done, he lets me go, and with his head over his shoulder turned, he seemed to find his way without his eyes, for out of doors he went without their helps, and to the last bended their light on me. So she says, after he had finished looking at her, he shook her a little bit, sighed, and then walked backwards out of the room without taking his eyes off her. So it's a pretty crazy encounter, really. And Polonius says, I will go seek the king. I'm going to tell Claudius about this. He says, this is the very ecstasy of love, whose violent property foredoes itself and leads the will to desperate undertakings, as oft as any passion under heaven that does afflict our natures. So he's saying that love makes people destroy themselves, the ecstasy of love, whose violent property foredoes itself and leads the will to desperate undertakings. So love makes people destroy themselves. And then, importantly, he adds to that, as oft as any passion under heaven that does afflict our natures. So he's saying that it is human nature that anything that we feel too strongly, any emotion that comes to us too strongly, is capable of destroying us, corrupting us, ruining us. So this is a really strong idea about human nature, and perhaps links into the idea of whether you should act without thinking, or if you should think without acting, or that balance between thinking about something and acting on something there. So then Polonius says, well, have you said anything mean to him? Like, have you aggravated him to act like this? And Ophelia says, no, I've just refused to see him as you requested I do. And Polonius says, well, that's what's made him mad. And he says, I'm sorry, I thought that he was messing with you. I didn't think he was actually going to marry you. I wish I'd thought about it more. I wish I'd known him better. And then that way I would have allowed him to keep seeing you, and he wouldn't have gone mad, and you would have ended up married to him. And then he says, it is as proper to our age to cast beyond ourselves in our opinions as it is common for the younger sort to lack discretion. So he's saying old people often think their opinions are fact and truth, whereas young people often don't have any sense at all and just sort of act without thinking. And then he says, come on, we better go. We've got to tell the king before something worse happens. We've got to be honest about what's going on. And that's the end of Act 2, Scene 1.